You'll be very surprised to know that we're now going to hear from Rupa.
Surprise! I don't think I've ever accepted hospitality from the industry as such, but I have been to the Hippodrome. And I've been in its former incarnation when it was a gig venue as well. But anyway, look, this stuff about advertising / sponsorship / promotion generally, there is a movement, so this white paper got a lot of good things in it, but the stuff on marketing and advertising, there's a lot of people who think that we're going the wrong way, and there is an argument for going back to the pre-2005 version of it, when it was much more limited to kind of football pools, the National Lottery, that kind of thing, bingo. So we've had evidence from over 50 academics who've done longitudinal research into all this. And it's sort of vulnerable people, and particularly children, who are susceptible to all this advertising. And again, some of the stuff in your voluntary code talks about the watershed and 9 p.m. That feels like it's for a different era, because on electronic devices with pop-ups and stuff, it seems inappropriate to talk about watersheds and 9 p.m. So, and the figures we've seen show that 105,000 children are addicted to gambling. And we've heard from other committee members about these 400 lives a year taken. So, what would you say to these calls to go much further in restricting advertising, and in fact going back to the 2005 regime?
Yeah, so we've embraced those changes going forward, and I will refer to our responsible gambling code, often referred to as the IGRG code. We're now moving into our 7th edition of that code, and we're putting measures in place that provide a reasonable approach to gambling. I'll give you 2 examples. One of the things that we did in the 6th edition is we increased the age filter to 25 plus for those looking to conduct online campaigns. Why did we do that? We were concerned that there were underage purporting to be between 18 and 24, and so by moving to 25 plus, we were preventing that messaging going to those. The other is, during COVID, we adopted a 20% of safer gambling messaging for broadcast and radio. We're now looking to extend that to all advertising so that we increase the channels by which we broadcast.
How do you enforce that, though? I mean, how do you know? Are you going to have some sort of strict ID checks or something?
So all of this is, all of our members have to abide by our code of conduct, and that in that code of conduct it says it has to abide by our codes. So under that system, obviously it can be reported about whether any of that is not being met.
How would you actually stop it? Because the research from the academic shows 11 to 14-year-olds are most susceptible. And there's tons of figures about under 18s, 55,000 people addicted, it says here, at the age of as young as 11, sort of thing. So how do you physically, can you put some software block in there or something? I don't get how. I know you're saying everyone's happy to sign up to this thing, but...
In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because we are trying to look at a program which, for instance, creates marketing suppression for online advertisements for all GamStop customers. Unfortunately, we need the assistance of the online companies to make this happen, because we have to match those customers against their customers in order to market suppress that. I mean, the statistics meant...
We wrote recently, as you would have seen, to the Secretary of State about this, actually asking for help from the government to get the platforms round the table to help us do more in terms of, suppression and age gating.
I mean, the Guardian's completely pulled out of all gambling advertising at all.
Except the National Lottery. I'm not sure, by the way, that the gambling had really, that the Guardian had any gambling advertising. I mean, it's a slightly flippant thing to say, but it did seem to me like someone who was teetotal announcing they were giving up the drink. I'm not taking away from the Guardian's move there.
Then does it need more of a prohibition approach if only teetotalers are doing it? I mean, is a blanket ban maybe the only way forward if you're saying that you've all got good intentions, but there's all these figures about 11-year-olds addicted? It's not working, is it?
We absolutely have to ensure that advertising is directed to the right people, which is 18 and older, and those who consume our products and services. Banning advertising would be a gift to the black market. right? Advertising is a privilege of license. It allows customers to be aware of offers, and it allows them to gravitate towards UK regulated sites. There would be no greater leveling up for black markets than if suddenly the UK operators were not allowed to advertise. And I think that's a critical point in making sure that we reduce that black market and keep people out of it. I will state on the statistics around children, because quite rightly, they're a vulnerable group. As mentioned before, participation in gambling has fallen from 23% in 2011 to only 7%, and this is according to the Gambling Commission's Young People and Gambling Report 2022.
I mean, we've got alternative figures from the National Institute of Economic and Social Research that show 0.7% of over 16-year-olds are problem addicted. So do you know what I mean? I used to be a statistician and an academic. You can always conjure up different figures to show what you want to show.
On advertising, there is a live debate which is between, do you just ban it completely or do you regulate it and restrict it? You'll be unsurprised to learn that the latter is our view, but it's not about camping on the status quo there. We're already governed by incredibly strict restrictions in terms of not just when we can advertise, who we can advertise to, the types and nature of advertising to make sure that it doesn't appeal to young people, and that this is also the thing I would say is this is an evolving space as well. So as I've mentioned before, this is not the beginning and the end of the journey, the white paper on this, and that is something that we work with the ASA and we work with other bodies on how can we further restrict advertising to protect vulnerable groups, in particular young people.
I just think that with electronic devices, sometimes the whole family shares the same one. I just don't see how you can do it. You haven't convinced me that there's a way that you can stop these 11-year-olds picking up mummy's phone and getting hooked when it's linked to their credit card as well.
Well, I mean, there's two issues there. One is how can you use technology to better ensure that those who should not be receiving advertising are not, and I've mentioned one of the things that we already worked on and put into our 6th edition. Again, though, I think it's helpful to understand what is the scale. So using another regulator's comment, the Advertising Standards Authority, the number of gambling advertisements on TV has fallen by over a quarter since 2010 and its lowest in its 12 years. So we have to understand the scale of the problem. The other bit, which is quite important, is education. Right? So our operators have put in 10 million of funding for the last 4 years to work with 2 charities in educating children about gambling and its risk. This has reached over 5 million underage children in this country, and it is all part of a program, including the government has made sure that gambling is also part of the curriculum in regards to the PHSE curriculum in schools. So there's an education point to play as well.
And the government could do more on this. And one of the conversations we had, so we talk about research, education and treatment. Often actually people are just talking about treatment. Then there's a kind of cottage industry around research. Very few people are talking about the E, which is education. It seems to me that a big part of the public debate around gambling, and has obviously dominated this session here as well, is about the outcomes. One of the things I said to the government strategically, I said, if I would do far more in terms of the education, awareness, prevention space. So the £10 million programme with YGAM that a lot of you will be familiar with in terms of constituents who work with GamCare, it's been incredibly successful in educating, whether it's educators like teachers or going in direct with young people and scout groups and all kinds of things. Really, what the government ought to be doing, if they're expanding significantly research, education and treatment funding, isn't there a strong argument that a significant proportion of that new and enhanced RET funding should go towards education? Because then we're really, rather than dealing with some of the problems that we're seeing at the end, we're actually doing far more in terms of awareness, education and prevention that I think could make a really transformative impact.
It's also the Association of Directors of Public Health, so it's from all sectors. There's quite a strong movement to maybe not ban all of it, but go back to the pre-2005, and also just people don't consume TV like they used to. So you're saying there's less hours. If you watch it on a catch-up service, you can still get the little pop-up adverts in between anyway.
It is, which is why you need a more sophisticated, and the picture, as you rightly say, is more complex now. So you need a more complex, a more multi-agency response when dealing with this. Online, social media adverts, television, all of those areas, sports sponsorship. I just think we need to see improvements right across the board on there. But there are a group of people who would just want to see a complete ban on advertising, in the same way they want to see a complete ban on sports sponsorship. The government was very clear in the white paper. There wasn't the evidence basis that said that advertising per se and sports sponsorship led to problem gambling, that the causal link wasn't there.
We've had a lot of evidence that suggests otherwise.
And I'm sure the committee have got evidence that will inform your report, but equally the
There's
government...
a whole coalition of all these groups, Coalition Against Gambling Advertising.
The government did the biggest review
clubs.
into gambling in a generation, and consulted widely and spent an eternity looking at these things, and they just didn't find the evidence base. There are calls from campaigners, I appreciate that, but there isn't the actual solid independent evidence base that links advertising and sports sponsorship to problem gambling. I appreciate there are different views on this.
I beg to differ. Do you, by the way, okay, last one from me. Do you, from 2026 to 27, front of shirt logo advertising is being banned. Do you think more of that will continue? Do you expect that that's the start of a trend now?
I would like to see more progress in the government. In the white paper talks about a new sports sponsorship code, and I appreciate there is some frustration in lots of parts that that there perhaps isn't more on that in the white paper. We argued actually strongly privately with the government that they could strengthen the nature of the white paper in that area. What's happening now is, and I mentioned, one of the things that I would like to see in relation to ad hoardings, perimeter advertising. I think there's a whole number of things that you could do, not just in football, particularly EFL and lower league football, changes that you can introduce, but actually across sport more generally, to raise standards and to make significant changes in sports sponsorship and advertising and the codes that govern that. That work at the moment is with the sporting bodies. My sort of plea to them, privately up to now and now publicly, is they really need to get on with that and treat this as a priority. And just because the government's published its white paper, they shouldn't think that that there isn't an ambition from all of us, including in the industry, to make more progress on really practical proposals about how you can raise standards in sports sponsorship. But we need the sporting bodies to really get on with this now.
Okay, thanks.